is Analog Spectrum. In today's episode, why are Jolly Ranchers called Jolly Ranchers? There's nothing jolly about these hard-ass candies, and they don't know shit about ranching.
All right, this is Analog Spectrum. This is Tony. I'm here with Doug.
What's going on, you guys?
Oh, so we're trying something new today. I don't know if I even should I even say? I don't even know.
It's all right.
I'm going to say. I'm fucking saying,
say
bro.
Say it.
We're actually recording online. We're going to use some very high-tech teleconferencing software. I think some of you may have heard of it. It's called Zoom.
Is that ZOOM? Yeah.
So the reason why is we just want to try something different. So, but today, I'm sure if you listen to the podcast on a regular basis, we did the Coast Guard podcast not too long ago. And I think I might even have mentioned this at the time. I was like, yeah, Doug, let's do a Coast Guard podcast. And he says, we're not going to be able to talk about the Coast Guard for an hour. And we just got out of boot camp. We got out of boot camp in the last podcast. So,
yeah. Well, that's because Tony talks a lot. I basically sit here and just listen.
No.
So, yeah.
I'll give you equal amounts. Equal amounts. So,
yeah, fair enough. All right.
Yeah. But picking up where we left off, if I remember correctly, when we last saw our heroes, they had just gotten out of boot camp.
Jesus. Speaking of that, man, I stumbled across a picture the other day of me in boot camp, and it's like, holy shit. Who is this toothpick, man?
Really?
I was a scrawny fuck. I probably weighed 140 pounds, 6'2",
Did you use it? Was it your like that Bravo picture?
Yeah, the posed one, the drops.
I freaking used mine as the picture for our first Coast Guard podcast. So,
oh Jesus,
send me yours, and I'll use it for the second one.
This is me saying no.
Okay, so no,
you go ahead and be vulnerable, Tony. I'm being protective because I look like an idiot. Whatever, nothing's really changed. Yeah.
No, yeah. I like how you finished my thought for me. That's so nice. So
yeah. But no, I'll send it to you. It doesn't make any difference.
Yeah, it's totally your call. I wouldn't obligate you to, but
yeah.
One thing it does, it keeps you from having to find a thumbnail. So
yeah, more AI generated stuff.
I like the AI generated stuff. We should talk about that.
It's cool, isn't it?
I love it. I love it. Yeah,
it's cool stuff. So anyway, all right. So what happened to you after boot camp? Did you do Did you do your 10 days of leave and stuff?
Yeah, you go home. You think you're a badass. Not really. But everybody's like, oh my God, you're here. You're like, I know, cut it all off.
Yeah.
But I don't remember. I went home for Christmas, and I think, it's funny when your son went through boot camp, when Andrew went through boot camp, and I saw him, it reminded me of my experience coming out of boot camp because you feel changed, I guess, but not really. So
yeah. So for everyone, my kid went through Air Force boot camp in San Antonio, and I came down and stayed at Tony's for his graduation, and then we all went out to dinner and did some. We went go-kart racing or something, didn't we?
We did some stuff like that. Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah, we did something. Yeah. So my mom joined us, and we came to see Tony. So yeah, it was the same for me. Like, it was weird during his graduation. We had that active shooter thing, and some kid shot his drill sergeant, and it was somewhere on the other side of base. We didn't know anything about it, but my mom doesn't move very well. At the time she was probably 80 or 81, and I remember I was sitting next to her, and I heard, I don't know how I got the word before they actually announced it, that there was an active shooter, and I told her, I said, okay, Mom, if anybody starts stampeding down these damn bleachers, just stay here. And I was thinking to myself, like, we'll bring up the rear, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But that didn't happen, so that was all good. But yeah, the whole like parade and all that sort of shit was delayed for like an hour and a half. Mm-hmm. I had to sit in the bleachers and wait until they cleared the active shooter thing. But yeah, some kid went crazy and busted into his drill sergeant's office and shot him and shot himself. And so yeah, it was crazy.
No, I remember that in boot camp they were always worried about somebody committing suicide or whatever, but it was smooth as much as it could be.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this is a really cheerful podcast. Let's keep going.
Know, right? Well, talking about Andrew for a second, digressing into Andrew, which is Doug, as everybody knows, is Doug's son. It's cool because the very first time I met Andrew, he was probably 8. and he was in Great Britain, he was in the UK, and he had this like thick child British accent,
Kind of like Harry Potter.
Yeah, a little bit like Harry Potter. And then we came back. You were living in San Francisco at the time. I saw him again. He was like about 14, I guess, at that time, and he still had the British accent. And then he went to boot camp, and he's, as I'm sure as everybody heard, he doesn't sound British anymore. That accent's gone.
Yeah, so, I can still hear a little bit of it, but it's not thick or anything like that.
No. But anyway, this is not a podcast about Andrew. Sorry.
No, it's not. Nice talking to you, Andrew. Okay.
Yeah. But we kind of talked about last time, like we, got our post or our assignment. My assignment had been the Harriet Lane, so I went home. Don't remember much about it. It was just I went home, and everybody was like, rubbing my bald ass head, which is my shaved head, and talking about how much I had changed. Which, let's be honest, I hadn't changed much. The fact
the only difference is you actually got up early.
Yeah, and so it was interesting that I got the Harriet Lane, and we had a sister company, and I think there was a individual and his name was Wesley, and Wesley also got the Harriet Lane. We weren't in the same company. He was like in Lima 132, and I was in Kilo 132. I think he may have been in India. I don't remember. And so he lived in Georgia too, and I said, well, shoot, dude, I'll pick you up on the way if you want. We'll just go up to the Harriet Lane together. And he was like, hell yeah. Just a really freaking cool guy, right? He was just very cool, very fortunate. Of course, at the time, like a lot of those things that would like be a red flag or stuff like that. I didn't have that kind of spidey sense yet in my life. I was like, I would have picked up anybody anywhere and taken him anywhere, right along with me. But he was great. And so I picked him up. We drove up. I knowing this podcast was coming up, to me, it's interesting that we were given responsibility. Like, you have to here's your orders, show up on this date at this time or else. And we did it. I mean, that's a little bit shocking to me now because I think about the way people are now, kids are now. And I don't think, I wasn't a responsible person. I wasn't a responsible. Yeah. So, and I showed up. Yeah.
Yeah. But on time.
Yeah. I got there and everything, And when I got there, the Harry Lane was underway, and so they parked us in the barracks and gave us a room. The next thing you know, I'm kind of and I was like 20 or 21 when I joined, so I'd already been on my own a little bit, so I wasn't like in that oh my gosh, I'm homesick, I'm shocked. I just was kind of like in a new place and just kind of living my life. Right. But I just remember like on one of the first days we were there, they sent us over to the first lieutenant shop, and they're like, where are you guys going? And we're like, we're going to Harriet Lane. It's underway. And so the boatswain mate, the BM2, and this is something you had mentioned before. He's like a BM2 or BM1, but he had like 48 years in. You know what I mean? He was
exactly.
he wasn't burning it up, right?
Trusty, yeah.
And I was waiting to retire. He'd probably been at that first lieutenant shack for 28 years. He's just happy and just fat, dumb, and happy. And he's like, go over to there was a club on base called Portside, and rake the gutters in front of Portside. So he went over there with a couple of rakes, and me and Wesley are like raking the few leaves out of the gutters. And I remember Wesley going, he starts like in his head writing a letter to his dad. He's like, "Dear Dad, first day in the Coast Guard is great. I've already made 2 drug busts." And of course, honest to God, it didn't get much more challenging than that for the first few years I was in, so.
The only thing I found challenging was that I think that just I've always, I've always been the type of person where I'm trusting, I trust people, give them the benefit of the doubt and whatever. So I had people messing with me, and I didn't see it coming. You know what I mean? Because I just don't. That's just not in my radar. Well, it is now, but I showed up. I walked into it. So, well, first of all, I went home. I think they give you like 10 days or something, and I went home to West Palm, and I was home for a few days, and the phone rang, and my dad answered, and he said, "Yeah, he's right here." And I wasn't expecting. I mean, I had a couple friends, but I didn't have like this torrent of people around me. Wasn't a celebrity or anything. Anyway, so somebody had called from me. What the hell? So I answered, and it was some yeoman from Key West. And my duty station was Isla Morada, which is a third of the way down the Florida Keys. And this yeoman from Key West called and says, "Hey, look, we're changing your orders." And I'm like, "Oh man, I thought I was slick getting my Isla Morada pick because nobody knew what it was." She said, "Yeah, we're changing your orders to Group Key West." And I'm like, "Oh crap!" So I finished out my 10 days. Whatever. Same with you. I mean, I saw some old friends and whatever, and just it was kind of antsy to get started. So I go down there and I check in, and literally I checked in minutes before the dude behind me. And I ended up getting the Aids to Navigation team, and that dude ended up getting like, I don't know, Ute or the Lipan, one of those 205 rust bucket things, And so I walk over and they said, "Oh, here you go to the ant team." So I walk over and knock on the door, and I'm all boot campy and stuff, standing at attention, ready for. And the chief that ran the Aids to Navigation team was sleeping on the sofa. Mm-hmm. He was literally sleeping. And then there was a first class who was sitting at a desk, and his feet was up on the desk, and he was whittling. He had a knife out, and he was whittling like the end of a broom handle, one of those ball in a cage type things or something. Mm-hmm. And a couple of the guys were out in the shop working, and it was just basically like a 40 by 40 shop with a bunch of boards stacked up and Aids to Navigation lights sitting around. It was clean. It was organized. It was my first impression. So I walk in and I introduce myself to the first class. Yeah, hey, great dude. I can't even remember his name, but I really liked that guy. He was a good guy. And he said, "Hey, come on in, sit down." And he woke the chief up. The chief was out. Apparently there was a dog track up in Boca Chica. The chief had the dog racing, And he apparently had quite a gambling streak. So he was up there the night before, and he was sleeping off his hangover or whatever. I had no clue what to expect. But I wasn't expecting that. So anyway, so he introduces me and all that stuff. And there's a couple. I think we had we had MK1 and MK3 and a BM1 and a BM3, and then me. That's the non-rate. And those guys couldn't say my last name. Like I was telling them a couple of times. That's So they ended up calling me Dexter because they couldn't. They couldn't. I don't know whether they were idiots or whatever. My name's pretty easy. Mm-hmm. But anyway, so I picked up that nickname like day one. And so I was Dexter for the whole time I was there from then on. But no, it was a cool duty station, though, I will say, the first time around. That was 1980, late 83 at that time.
Yeah, a couple thoughts. Like one, you mentioned going to Alameda. For those that don't know, which is probably most people, Alameda had a lot of issues because they were involved in kind of what do you say, controversy where they were actually assisting the people bringing marijuana. I think it was Alameda or it was Marathon.
Yeah, it was Alameda. What they were doing, I think, is they were doing drug busts off the coast.
Yeah, and
then they were taking the drugs and then reselling the drugs, whatever. So it was a big sting operation and all that stuff. And apparently, it was pretty. I mean, in the 80s when things were getting kind of hectic, and if a new guy showed up, they would take him out and stick a gun to his head and say, "Listen, you're on board with us or you're not."
Right.
And so, of course, the new guy's like, "Oh, hell yeah, I'm on board," Right. So I'm glad I was lucky, man. I dodged that. I didn't get to, didn't have to go through that stuff,
Exactly. Yeah. So that's what I was thinking. And I think the reason they, it's the oldest story in the world that the reason they were found out is, there were people down there that were, E2s, E3s that were driving around like in Corvettes or super nice.
I would have been that stupid. I really would have. Absolutely. Yeah.
It's like, okay, be cool.
Yeah, don't spend all your money. Don't get flashy cars.
Yeah, they freaking did. But and the other thing is, you mentioned the whole like showing up. Yeah, when you're in boot camp and they're like, you're in the military, you're in the military, you're in the military, and you show up at your first duty station, you're like, this is just another job. It's just a job. And you also mentioned like people messing with you. It's like you get messed with, and then you mess with people. And it's funny because, like I said, like I think back to like high school, like the people in high school, they were mean. You know what I mean? When they were bullies, they were mean. And the Coast Guard, when people mess with you, it kind of was like in good fun. They knew that.
Yeah.
I mean,
most of it.
Again?
Most of it. Yeah. Most of it was. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, but there was a lot of hazing, but the hazing was just, that's just the way it was. Well, anyway, so the ship finally shows up, and I was fortunate in that I showed up with me and 5 other guys, right? And so that's
Oh,
who
so you get
ended
to
up on the boat.
deflect
So,
some of that new guyness, right?
yeah. It was the Gazelle concept. I mean,
Yes.
there wasn't enough to go around. It's interesting because you mentioned the whole boot camp thing. I remember like this one hazing thing. This didn't happen to me, but we had this JG, our ensign, and actually I think he's since passed away. If he's listening, then he hasn't. His name was Willis, and he was just a really cool guy. He was a Mustang, and he we did this thing where we got a bunch of boot campers on board. I'd been there like about 6-8 months, and they were standing in the berthing area. And we're just kind of playing it up normal, right? They're asking like, well, what's it like being on the ship? We're like, oh, that's no big deal, getting underway, blah, blah, blah. It's yeah, you have to stay in duty, but usually 1 to 4 or something like that underway. It's, you might, blah, blah, blah. And we'd set this all up. And then Willis, the JG, comes in and he's got like his, he's wearing his trop being like a short sleeve shirt. And he's got the white cap on. And he's wearing like mirrored sunglasses and he's got his gloves on, and he's like, this berthing area looks like shit. And he starts fucking going boot camp. He's going like drill sergeant.
Oh, shit.
He's like, I want this floor waxed. Everybody get down. And he starts cranking us, right?
Oh, shit.
just to mess with these new guys from boot camp, man.
Yeah, flashback, right? PTSD. Well, I had that. What these guys did to me. So at some point, when I first got there, we had a 20-foot boat and a 17-foot boat, and the 17-footer was an outboard, and the 20-footer was an inboard outboard. And what we did with those is we went around locally and repaired any of the day boards or the lights. So if you can imagine. I don't know what they're called, but every city has some kind of a crew. There's a traffic accident and somebody knocks over a light pole or a stop sign. Somebody's got to go back and replace that stuff, right? This is the same thing, but it was on the water. So we did the day boards and the buoy lights and stuff like that. And we didn't have any equipment to like fix the buoys. So what we would do is we would go to a buoy or we would go to a light. And if the light was burned out, of course, a mariner would report that to the Coast Guard and we would get the message the next day, and then off we go. And we go out and fix it. And all we would do to fix it is take a couple of car batteries and put them on top of the buoy. We tied them down and stuff, and then we called it hot packing. He just made the thing run for a couple more days so people could navigate until a buoy tender could get there and legitimately fix the thing, Mm-hmm. And so that's what we would do. We'd take the 17-foot boat or that 20-foot boat, and we'd zoom around the Florida Keys and just putting up fresh day boards or fixing stuff and whatever. And once in a while, if we had one that was far away, like Marathon, that was like 50 miles. So we would trailerize the boat and drive it up there and launch the boat and then go fix stuff there, which I thought that was the coolest. Like, I don't know if I said this in the first episode of this, but I thought I was joining like the Florida Marine Patrol, when I didn't know what the Coast Guard was. And so when we started doing that, I'm like, this is cool, man. Cause I enjoyed small boats near shore. I didn't like going out to sea.
Right. And one thing about both the AIDS navigation station and so forth, they get good equipment. I mean, the trucks that they trailer with are nice.
F-250s and stuff like that. Yeah. It wasn't chintzy at all.
No. And the boats, I remember, they had a Boston whaler. I remember when I was in Key West, the station had a Boston whaler and the AIDS navigation had a Boston whaler. And those guys were like in a competition to see, who could make that boat, the most badass freaking boat.
It's all decked out, spending taxpayer dollars. Yeah, absolutely, man.
Fast as hell. And scary fast. Yeah. So
we had fun with all that. But then at some point, our chief finagled it's called a mini buoy tender. I think this thing was like 65 feet long and it had a flat deck on the back with a winch on either side. And there was a big V cut into the back. And the idea was you back up to a buoy and you hook those two winches there's a big pad eye on both sides of the buoys. You hook that thing and then you can suck the winches in and then the buoy will literally come and sit right there at the back of the boat. And you could stand on that flat deck and work on the lights and stuff. So, because it's kind of dangerous on those buoys when you're sitting out there bobbing around. I could not tell you how many tools we lost. Because you carry your tool bag up, and you're sitting on the buoy and you're floating, you're floating around, and any sort of wake or anything from a passing boat, man, you're bobbing all over the place, and tools slip left and right. Of course, we were idiots because we didn't tie them off. And we lost a zillion tools doing that. But anyway, yeah. So when we got the 65 footer, we brought it back to Key West, and that's when I saw my first dead guy. By the way, too, we picked up a floater on the way home, and that grossed the shit out of me, man. That was nasty. Again, I was like 8. Yeah, I just turned 18, so I was young. And anyway, so they got him in his Stokes litter and pulled him out of the water, and he was on the back of the deck. And I'm like, okay, I'll drive. I didn't even want to look at that dude, man. He was all gray, it's like a pale gray blue color. And so when we got back to the pier, they had called the coroner, and a couple guys carried him over the brow, and they set him down on the pier and in the Stokes litter when the coroner came. And the coroner just took like a meat thermometer and stuck it in his chest, just to get his internal body temp. I'm like, holy crap. And seawater and icky shit was gooping out of his mouth. That was nasty, man. I was not ready for that.
And some of these stories, I apologize in advance, but this is the way life is. When I was down there, one time we went to a marathon, me and the other corpsman to do training, whatever, CPR, whatever, and we got there, most everybody in the station was out, and they're like, well, where are they? And they're like, they had to pick up a dead body, right? And so as the boat comes into the station, or pulling into the cut, right, the canal, there was a seawall right there, a concrete seawall, and the body was in a body bag, right? And they put the body bag on that seawall, and of course, it kind of fell over a little bit. It was kind of half on and half off, and the zipper had opened up a little bit, and whatever was just like leaking out onto the concrete on the other side of the seawall. And of course, here comes the station dog, right? It's like, he starts lapping that stuff up, man. And of course, what's every station dog's name? They always Mayday. And they hear him go like, Mayday, Mayday, stop it,
Yeah, that's funny.
I remember like retching. I was just like, oh my God, it's like that dog.
Yeah, it was pretty gross. I know we picked that floater dude up because his skin, he had been floating for a while.
Yeah.
And his skin was kind of going through the wire mesh on the Stokes litter when they picked him. I was like, creeps, man. It was not nice.
You gotta be careful because if anybody doesn't know what a Stokes is, it's got kind of this chicken wire mesh in it that and it's usually used for airlifting or pulling people, but it's not meant for cadavers, dead bodies, right?
But anyway, so the rest of that story, people messing with me, is when we finally got that boat back. That hatch, that's the deck that was on top that was flat. It had 2 hatches, and it opened up, and you could work on the engines, or you could replace the engines or whatever, crane them in and out.
Right.
But so you had the engineers were down there overhauling that engine one day, and gosh, man, I don't think I was in the Coast Guard 4 or 5 months by this time, and so they said, hey, Dexter, go over here. And they were all greasy, and they were in their T-shirts and stuff, the tools everywhere. And they're like, hey, man, I need you to go to the supply cage for me and get me a part. And I'm like, okay, sweet, dude, I'll do that. Because I'm going to take a break from painting and scraping. Yeah, I'll do that in a heartbeat. And he says, yeah, go over there and tell SK1 over there, Jones or whatever his name was, tell him I need a smoking lamp. And I'm filament for the smoking lamp. I'm like, okay, sure, filament, smoking lamp, got it. And off I walk all the way across the base, find the SKs off. I had never been over there before. I asked a couple people, and I show up. SK1 is over there, and I'm like, oh yeah, so-and-so sent me over here, for the filament for the smoking lamp. And he looks at me, didn't even miss a beat, didn't even blink an eye. And he's like, yeah, what size? And I'm like, I don't know. They didn't say. They just said Philly. No, man, I got to know. There's all kinds of sizes. Oh, shit. And I walk all the way back over to the boat. This was like a quarter-mile walk all the way across the base, all the way back over there. And there they were. And he said, hey, you get that thing? And I said, no, man, he needs to know what size. Oh, shit. Tell him it's a number 8. And okay, so I all the way back over. And he's like, there is no number 8. They go by quarter inch or 1/8 inch or whatever. All the way back over. I was getting frustrated by this point. Those guys, of course, are cracking up, and I'm like, oh shit, man. So I don't know who finally gave it away, but yeah, this kind of stuff they
Well,
did.
and for those listening, their smoking lamp's not a thing. That's what
Yeah.
they light up when you're allowed to smoke in the boat. The smoking lamp is lit, so.
But yeah, like shoreline, they sent it for
Yeah, that kind of
shoreline.
stuff. Calibrate the radar. They have all these things.
Oh, did you guys do that? Did you calibrate the radar?
We again, 6 people, right? So
Yeah.
so I somehow managed to work around it, but I remember like one time I was making rounds or something during a quarterdeck watch, and I go up to the bridge, and there's like 3 or 4 of guys on deck force, and they got this mic out, and the mic was the speakers for that went around the bridge, and they're going like a little left, and they let go, and they just start cracking up, and I look out the window, and sure as hell there was a guy out there with flashlights. Yeah, and they got him dancing out on the forecastle.
So what would happen is they would take new guys and say, hey, listen, they would usually what they would do is say, hey, the new guy always gets the crappy job, right? Well, this is your turn. Here's your crappy job. Calibrate the radar. And you're, as a new guy, you're like, what are you talking about? I was like, well, like the radar, dude, like we need to calibrate it. So what we do is we have to get some reflective material, and we put a couple of you guys up here, and then we can gauge how far away you are. And, whether it goes big, long explanation, basically all they do is they wrap your head and your arms in tinfoil, and they put you up on the front of the ship, and then they call over that PA system and tell you to dance around and move around here, move around there. Of course, there's 50 guys up on the bridge laughing at you the whole time, and you're like, "Oh, 1 foot, dude, 1 foot, yeah, stick your left arm out," and all that shit.
Oh my god!
Half the time, if you're underway, you're seasick anyway, and don't feel good anyway.
Yeah, but yeah. So I showed up. I showed up for the ship, and like I said, one of 6. I mean, my experience was different than yours because I was underway right out of boot camp, and the ship had pulled in. We met the ship, and it was the Harry Lane, which is a 270, and it had like a 6 weeks out, 6 weeks in kind of rotation, and things I'm sure are different now. Like for example, back then, and when you come out of boot camp, for anybody that's curious, is that now there's potentially you don't go directly to school. Not usually. Usually you become what's called a non-rate, and you go out there and you do the most grunt work that the Coast Guard can.
You clean, you paint, you peel potatoes, whatever.
So if you're a seaman, then you and I understand it's a terrible name. You're usually part of deck force, and you do things like what Doug would just said: paint, clean, rake. It depends on where you're at. If you're a fireman, you're usually part of engineering, which means you're doing things like changing oil, blah blah blah. And now they have airmen where you can actually go to air stations. I don't know. I'm sure they limit that because everybody would want to be an airman if they let everybody be an airman. But I was an on-rate seaman on a ship. So we did things like paint, chip paint, and then paint again, and then chip the paint we just painted, and we waxed the decks like Doug mentioned during the boot camp one. That still goes on during once you're on your first ship, you wax all decks. Another thing you do is you mess cook. I mess cooked twice when I was underway. And mess cooking usually it's like a 1 month gig where you I was a scullery bitch where I wash dishes. Could have been worse, could have been better. Chief's mess is what everybody wants to do, and then you could be a wardroom mess cook where you take care of the officers or the mess deck. And so I was scullery, whatever. I mean, that's where I got pranked a lot in the scullery. But one of my favorite stories I want to make sure I tell is that again, me and Wesley were kind of parallel. And so he must kick the same time I did. And I remember, like we were underway. And by the way, if you're wondering, hey, how rough does it get? It gets friggin' really rough.
It gets rough. Yeah.
It gets very, very rough. I mean, like it is, a small boat, if there's like a hurricane or rough seas, you don't turn. You just go, they figure out a way to go through it and with the least amount of, hell for the crew, but it's usually a lot, I still remember like when you get underway, they're always making announcements. They're called pipes, where they're like, "Hey, one of the ones they would say if the seas got real heavy is the weather decks are secured. Nobody's outside of the ship. You have to stay inside.
Fall over.
Yeah, if you'll fall over and die, and if you end up in the water at all, unless they actually witness you falling over, you're gone. You're dead.
Your chances are not good. Yeah.
Zero. Like that one guy recently that got found. I was telling Melanie that reinforces my belief in a higher power, because that guy should be dead as shit.
That's miracle territory. Yeah.
It is miracles. Yeah. And but of course, I'm 22 years old. And I'm thinking, why do they not want you to go outside? And the seas were like 30 to 40 foot seas. And of course, if you're on watch on the bridge, you see them, but you're 40 feet up, and they don't have there isn't the shock. So I remember like going out on the fantail, which is at water level, pretty close, and opening up a hatch and looking outside and seeing like a 40-foot wave.
Yes, you're looking up at the top of the wave.
It's shocking how
it does. It scares the crap out of you.
It is insane. I mean,
yeah.
It'll definitely like nowadays I'll be around like a 22-year-old and they're like, I have anxiety, and you're like, about what? It's like, I'm afraid of like dark spaces. I'm thinking, you're a wuss, okay?
Yeah.
Because there are things out there a lot worse than dark spaces.
There's bigger dragons out there, yeah.
Yeah, they're dragons. So anyway, but I remember like one time when we were mess cooking, Wesley was on. This just makes me laugh thinking about it. He's on the mess deck and he's got the floor buffer. And I remember like he's buffing the floors and the seas are real heavy. And all of a sudden, like we take a heavy roll and that thing starts like spinning like a top, but he didn't let go of it. So
he's like dragging his ass around. Those things are powerful too, man.
Yeah, it's like flinging him around. And finally it throws him against a wall, and he's he's laying there and the buffer's on his side, and he stands up. And the funny part was he just starts like kicking the shit. He starts kicking it, and he's and just a string of profanity. I just remember thinking, God, that's funny. But yeah, being underway there, you get very dialed into the sound of the ship. And I remember that like the very first time I got underway, like laying in my rack, and the rack is your bed, and it's honestly like maybe 18 to 24 inches to the space above you. So you're laying in this very tight space.
They call them coffin racks.
Yeah, like coffin racks. And 21 people in a berthing area, probably most people listening to it, 21 people in a berthing area, probably the size of your bedroom. Like that's how big it was, right? And maybe smaller, probably smaller. And the lights are out, or the reds are on, and the seas are heavy, and I'm laying there, and I just think to myself, how did I get here? This is crazy. Yep. How did I end up in this place? And I probably was someplace like off the coast of Cuba, and it really is very sobering. And then like you would be underway, and once the engine started up, your body got very used to the sound of the engines, the feel of the engines. And if the engines ever shut off when you were underway, like you were immediately awake.
You knew, yeah.
Yeah, you knew bad stuff was about to happen. Engines don't shut off. The engines don't shut off. If the engine shut off, something bad just happened, and you would just wait. Yeah, you would wait. You just wait for GQ or GE or whatever now to start sounding. Bang, 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 and almost invariably it was a main space oil leak or a main space fire. And I was fortunate because my like I think I told you this before, my assignment we didn't have general emergency at the time. We just had general quarters, and general quarters underway was the same for emergency as it was for like wartime steaming. And again, like you were talking about, you ended up at the H navigation. Like I got on there and they just were like stacking and racking, and like Wesley got number 2 nozzleman, and I got 50 cal machine gun loader.
Oh, sweet. You lucked out.
I lucked out, and I got to fire that thing and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that was awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually love the damage control side of the Coast Guard. And for anybody who is curious, basically the way they organize the response to emergency situations is the ship is, if you ever watch the Titanic and they explain how the ship is broken into like segments and you can close the hatches and make it watertight. Well, they learned their lesson, obviously, on the Titanic, that those walls need to go all the way to the top. So that's what they do with military ships. And basically there's different conditions. So if you set, for example, condition zebra, that meant like all of the watertight doors were closed. You could not leave them open. If you traversed through one, you had to close it behind you and so on. William, all of the air ducts were all closed, and that was in case of like a biological attack or something. Anyway, they had all these different modes of readiness, I guess you could call it. And so when there was a general emergency, could have been a fire, it could have been flooding, could have been another, an attack from a hostile or whatever. you go to general quarters, and then you start figuring out how to respond, right? But you get everybody at their station. And then you got guys all over the ship. Some are on firefighting details, some are on pipe patching or plugging, and some are plotting to, listening to try to figure out where the damage is. And the engineers are trying to figure out the best way to keep the ship afloat and all that. So it's a really, really complex structure and organization of how it's all organized. But I loved that stuff, man. I just loved it. And I worked my way from the bottom. I was a pipe patching guy when I first started. And that was on the Venturous, and I got that down quick. And then I went into the plugging team, and I never did. I practiced on the fire stuff, but they never put me on nozzleman or whatever. But I do think I was just too scrawny for that. Those hoses they got a lot of pressure, man. You have to be stout to handle those things. But anyways, so I ended up eventually in the damage control center, which is where all the information came into. And then the main engineer on the ship would send out orders. And it was like, I swear to God, Tony, it was like a foreign language. I mean, but I was really, really good at that. And that's why even as an E2, they put me in there because I was very good at that. And but I couldn't tell you now. Like I had that stuff memorized. I could tell you exactly how every compartment was numbered, every pipe was numbered. I had all that stuff memorized, and I was quick. But nowadays, I think back and I'm like, oh shit, man, I can't even remember like how they do the compartments,
Oh yeah, exactly. Everything was numbered, so you could easily find it on a ship. But I always thought it was interesting that you could have these damage controlmen, and they were kind of idiots. But damn, they knew their job. Like if that ship was sinking or there was an issue, they knew exactly what to do. Yeah, it's very impressive. Man.
Some of those guys were mouth breathers for sure. Cavemen kind of deal. But that was fun, anyways. Yeah. So
yeah, and just real quick, I'm finishing up with the Harriet Lane because actually, what I want to do is we have a little ways to get. We have a little bit more time because somehow we need to like bring our careers together. And you've been in longer than me, so I'm gonna get up to my A school and stop. But yeah, so I did a few patrols, and that was fine. And
you guys were based out of what, South Carolina or something?
No, we were out of Portsmouth, Virginia.
Virginia, okay.
Yeah. And I remember, like I said before, we painted a lot of stuff. Now we did. They don't do anymore. Like we were actually responsible. Like we would go out there on a paint float. You were talking about dropping stuff in the water. We were always dropping like air tools and buckets and
we polluted more than any of the mariners did.
Oh God, and I remember also again, the responsible party. There's things we just shouldn't have been allowed to do, and they would say, oh, go grab the paint float on so and so pier and drag it around, and we would put two people on the paint float. We'd start kind of walking around, and the next thing it would break loose, and the paint float would float out into the Chesapeake Bay with two people on it, and paint float has a scaffolding on it to reach the top of the, like 3 or 4 decks up. So it's got like a 20 or 30 foot scaffolding on it. And the paint float itself is maybe like 20 by 30 or something like that. And the thing would break loose and float out. And again, I don't think anybody, when the ship has to be painted, they take it into the yard now. So, they're not, but we were sanding, shooting crap in the water. And a lot of the primers we used were toxic as hell. They even called them like red death.
They called it green death or red death.
Red death.
Yep. And there's a good one. I was painting, I think it was green death I was painting, and this was, I was painting that 65 footer, and I was done for the day, wanted to go home. And so I held up my paintbrush and told the bosun mate, he was a third class. I'm like, hey man, I'm all finished. You know what I would do with this brush? He was, I just throw it aside. I just threw it aside. He was probably joking, but I did it. I don't know. Sure.
Oh, and I remember we'd be out there like with an air tool with a wire wheel and be like, man, all of a sudden it would drop and and it would go into the water. And it only happened once, but I knew it went in, and of course it was still spinning, and then all of a sudden it just breaks loose, and when they pull it back up, it's gone. I mean, God knows how expensive that thing was, and it was history.
Well, not only that, but I mean, you think about, there was no protective. I mean, we wore some protective stuff, but for the most part, when you were grinding off old paint, it went straight into the water. We didn't do it from going in the water. Yeah, all that lead paint and all that shit.
Yeah, lead. Yeah. It was, and we also mentioned I would wear like a mask, but I think sometimes we wore like respirators. But
most of the time it was a t-shirt.
Yeah, something like that. And but But yeah, there's probably other things that happened while I was underway. I mean, I just remember waiting to get orders to A school to go become a corpsman. We had there was all kinds of crazy stuff, that happened while I was underway. We went through Rough Tray, which is the fresher training.
That was great. I love that. Yeah.
Oh, that was
everybody hated it. I was weird. I liked it. I really did. I enjoyed it.
I think honestly, if we would have done it in San Diego, it would have been fine. You know what I mean? But
yes, maybe that's why.
Yeah, but Cuba is a military base with nothing to do, and in a way, the comparison I can make to boot camp is you're always kind of waiting for something bad to happen, but nothing bad ever happened. And there was a lot of cool stuff that happened. Like again, I stood watch, I did lookout and I was whatever called the helmsman, right? And so I hated that. I hated being because you would end up getting a watch where it'd be like 2:00 in the morning and you're up on the bridge. I know, like when I was underway on an icebreaker, those guys did have a lookout, but they were not doing anything because again, you're on the icebreaker, for example, you're going from Hawaii to Australia. You're not in the shipping lanes. And even if you were, you're not boarding anybody. It's an icebreaker.
Right.
Just get there. The job of lookout is to make sure you didn't hit an island, right? But on a white hole, where we did a bunch of law enforcement, we were constantly looking for people to board. And that's what we did. We boarded. You were on the benchers. You board, you board, you board, you board. That's what you do. So once you get into and the captain, honest to gosh, I think sometimes we could have exited the Chesapeake Bay. And the first freaking sailboat we saw, man, we were on that thing,
Yeah.
It was all about numbers.
That's one thing that used to piss me off because we get underway and there's a routine. Like this is one of the things. Let me interrupt you for a second because I want to jump in a couple things that you said.
Right.
Being on a ship underway is there's a routine. You develop this routine. Like life is very, very repetitive and. At first, it's sort of tedious, but you get used to it. And like Tony was saying, the sound of the engines, the sound of the hatches opening and closing. In your first couple of nights on the ship, when somebody comes into the berthing area and they open that big steel door and then they close it again and shut down that big lever, like you see on the movies, you can't sleep because it's all these weird, crazy sounds. And after a while, you get so used to it, then you can tell, like even your subconscious, you can tell when things aren't right. You can feel when the ship's not moving properly or when the engines don't sound right or whatever, and it wakes you up. So that realization that you had when you said like, man, how did I end up here? I think that's a thing that that helps people that go through it. It helps you grow like as an actual person because there's no real consequence when, and I'm talking about our youth. I won't even comment on today's youth because it makes me ill. But on our youth, there was no real consequence to anything we did. You know what I mean? Like we did some stuff and, the worst thing to do is to get yelled at or something, but I mean, you face this realization at 18 or 19 or 20 years old that, hey man, I'm part of something bigger now that has the potential to save lives or to take lives for that matter. And I thought that was and a million little things build up over time. And I think that's why military people bond so well is because we get that. And civilians, they're not forced to go through it oftentimes, so there's a little bit of a disconnect, I think, for those who've been in the service and those who haven't. And it's not a snobby thing at all. Not in my mind anyway. To me, it's just a differentiation, But the other thing you said is about, doing scullery and stuff and being a mess cook. When I was in Key West, I had to do that as well. So I was on the ATON team for a while, but then I had to go be a mess cook and I actually liked it. And I turned that into my job. I ended up going into food service because of that. The dude that was working the kitchen, I think it was an E4. And this guy had probably been in for 15 years or something. And I think he was an E5 or an E6 at some point and he got himself busted down. And I mean, this was they were just starting to do drug testing. And they would tell you when they were doing it. I would say, okay, we're having a whiz quiz coming up next week on Monday. And so, all the guys who smoke pot or whatever they did, okay, not this weekend, man. That kind of stuff. And I think he was one of those. I think he had been busted a couple times, but I liked him. I got along with this dude great, man. But he would he wouldn't show up for work, and I'd be in the galley by myself. So I'd start cracking eggs, and we got to cook chow for 50, 60, 80 people. So I'd start prepping stuff and getting bacon ready. And next thing you know, he started teaching me how to do it all for his benefit, of course, right? He could just roll in late and I'd do his work. But I really liked it. And I think the thing that got me the most was everybody from the base came through the galley. So I was not mess cooking for more than 2 weeks probably. And all of a sudden I knew everyone. Whereas when I was on the ATON team and we were kind of isolated, we did our own thing. And I didn't know any of the small boat guys, I didn't know any of the administrative people or any of that stuff. And all of a sudden I'm in the galley and I'm just naturally friendly and chatting with people. And yeah, pretty soon I'm knowing everybody. And I was like, man, that's kind of cool. So that attracted me and I just decided to go to cook school.
Did you strike SS or did you go to school?
No, I went to school.
And that was Petaluma for you too?
Petaluma, yep. Petaluma, California.
Yeah, we'll get to that. We'll get to Petaluma in a bit. So you both went to Petaluma.
Yes.
It's interesting. So was the galley in the same place as it was when we were there?
Yep. Yeah, and the barracks were upstairs.
Yeah, that changed for sure.
Yes.
The barracks
well, they built that whole building where the barracks were when you and I were there. That was brand new. That building wasn't there when I was there.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, because I know that when I was on the Harry Lane and probably when you were on the Venturous, well, no, maybe not. You were not a non-rate on the Venturous. You were rated, right?
On the Venturous, that was right out of cook school. Yeah. So I was only an E3, but I was rated.
Yeah. But a lot of times they didn't, we lived on the ship. I mean, I lived on the ship, like for the year I was there, I didn't have housing off the boat. So even when the ship was tied up, I lived on the ship and they don't do that anymore. Now, they
really?
Yeah, no. As a matter of fact, they made that change shortly after I left in 90, where they pretty much said that, it was, for lack of a better term, inhumane to make people live on.
I would have agreed at the time.
Yeah. Well, and if anybody's listening to this thinking, man, it sounds a little bit like prison. Yeah, it's a lot like prison. It is.
Yeah. So if you take a single mattress right now, granted, this mattress is 2 inches thick, cheap foam, not good foam, cheap foam, right? Probably used 5,000 times before. Slap it on top of a metal box, and that metal box is probably 8 inches deep, and it has a lid. And you open up that lid, and that storage is all you have. That and one stand-up small little locker. That's all the storage you have. And I lived on the Venturous for 6 months, 8 months.
Yep.
Something like that. And that's all. It's all you got. No.
Yeah. You don't. You're in. If you have a vehicle, you can get the best vehicle ever. And the locker that Doug is talking about, the stand-up locker. You remember your high school locker? Yeah, about a fourth the size of your high school locker.
Yeah, I could fit probably. And of course, you have to have all your uniforms and stuff, right? All that stuff. And it has to stay nice. I mean, you can't just crumple it up.
Yeah.
So I would say I could fit probably like with shirts and pants hung on. You could fit with like 6 or 8 hangers in there. But that's tight. When you get that many in there, it's tight.
Yeah.
So, but then you had to like tie your shoes to your rack so they didn't, fly around when the seas got heavy and so on. Yeah, it was just it was a great experience really in terms of like growing and stuff. It sucked at the time. I didn't. Yeah.
Well, and what I talked about in the last podcast about gear adrift, that shit carried over into your ship too. You weren't allowed to have.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and most people did on a ship sleeping. We slept in sleeping bags, and so you'd have like a blanket and a pillow, and you just sleep in a sleeping bag.
Yeah, so, I slept in my rack. I didn't do the sleeping bag thing. I didn't like it because I slid around.
There was this one guy. His name was maybe someday he'll listen to this. His name was Funkhauer, and Funkhauser. He was Cajun. And he was maybe probably about 5'3", maybe 128 pounds wet. And he had a top rack, and he had a freaking thick Cajun accent. And I remember, and he had a top rack. And the top rack on these boats were, like 7 feet off the ground, And so you're thinking, well, that's pretty tall, right? No, it was like 7 feet, and then the roof was like 8.5 feet, right? So you're kind of up there, like wedged in the ceiling. Yeah, when you got to the boat, if you were new, you're like, guess what, bitch? You get the top rack. And if you're here long enough, you get a bottom rack. And if you're here longer than that, you get a middle rack. And that's the That's the cherry
That's the
rack,
primo,
right?
yeah.
Yeah. And so he's up in this rack, the worst rack. It's like right there by the head. And the guy would have night terrors, right? And
We had the same thing, dude. We had a guy doing that.
this guy. So I remember he starts screaming, and he's Cajun, right? So it's kind of like, oh, God, and he's it's Cajun. And so he's in a sleeping bag, and everybody's got their head out of the curtain because you have curtains that close you can't see out, and so everybody's sticking their head out, all like 18 people, and all of a sudden he just rolls out and like falls to 7 feet, just boom, and slams into the deck, and everybody's looking, and all of a sudden he gets up and he goes, I just fell out of my rack, bro. Oh, Funkhauser. And I think he was a lifer too.
Yeah, we had a guy, same deal. This was an older dude. And same thing, he had night terrors and whatever, and he ended up falling out of his rack one night, but he was kicking and screaming all the way down. He was top rack, and he was bumping shit all the way down, man.
Yeah, that's a good way to get a medical board. That's a good way to get kicked out. So they don't like you. They don't like people who have sleep problems.
No,
so
not at all.
So yeah, so I did my time, put in for A school, got orders, and like went to Petaluma. So
yeah. Did you do good in A school?
Yeah. I mean, I wasn't number one, but I definitely was not the bottom. And yeah, and probably because we're coming up on about an hour, probably I might save A school for the next time. But yeah, I did fine. Just for anybody that doesn't have Google Maps, Petaluma is about an hour and a half north of San Francisco.
Yeah, north of San Fran, Two Rock.
And the Coast Guard ended up with this hunk of property. I think it used to be like a naval listening base for submarines during World War II or something. And yeah, so got my EMT there. I got some stories about Petaluma, but
yeah,
but from there. And did you go to SA school?
It was subsistence specialist when I went through, and then it changed to food service specialist, and now it's, I think, they call it something different now, like nutrition specialist or something like that. I just talked to a kid the other day that's what he did. So
that's fancy.
But anyway, yeah. So basically, I was a cook, and yeah, I did. I went through, and I was very proud because when I was not a good student in high school, I didn't like it at all. But once I get into the Coast Guard, somehow again, like you mentioned, I had this realization, like, this is not a game. You know what I mean? I'm actually part of life now instead of just under the wing of my parents or whatever. And so I started applying myself, and I aced every school I went to when I was in the Coast Guard.
Did you meet your first wife in Key West when you were at the Age of Navigation?
No. Yeah. Well, I did. Yeah, at the ATON. When I was at the ATON, yeah.
Were you married when you were at A school?
No. I got out of A school. I got orders to the Ventures, which is in LA, and then drove back down to see my parents, and then went to see her and basically eloped. Is basically what we did. Yeah. So her parents were pissed because they were very conservative, very religious. Yeah. So they were not happy with either of us. So anyway.
You didn't keep her.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's true. Just borrowed for a while.
You gave her back.
Oh,
golly.
Yeah, I gave her back. Jeez. Don't be so grandpa-ish.
That's a whole other topic. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one other thing I want to mention, you're talking about rough seas. When I was on the Boutwell, it was my last tour of duty before I retired. We circumnavigated the globe. We left San Francisco, went to Hawaii. From Hawaii, went to Singapore. From Singapore up to the North Arabian Gulf. We were there. I was there in the North Arabian Gulf when they launched all the missiles and all that sort of stuff to get into Desert Storm. Operation Iraqi Freedom. And then we left there, went through the Suez Canal, the Mediterranean, over through the Panama Canal, and then up the West Coast. And there was a time, I'm not exactly sure where we were in all of that mess, but there was a time that it was rough, man. It was really rough. And I had my own stateroom. I was a warrant officer by then. And I had my own stateroom. And I went into, I stopped getting seasick after a while. When early days, man, it was rough, man. I was seasick for days at a time. But I was fine by now. And so I opened the wardroom, and the wardroom basically took up on this ship, it took up the entire width of the ship. So the only way to go around the wardroom from the forward part of the ship was to go outside or over. You could go above decks. But so I'm an officer, so I cruised it all the time. So anyway, it was rough as hell, man. So I go to open the door to the wardroom to go out and was getting coffee, or I was going back to the mess deck or something. But as soon as I opened the door and I was about to step in, we took a big roll, and I saw all the furniture in the wardroom slide all the way over to one side of the room. And then we rolled back and it all slid back the other way. I just shut the door, went back into my room. I'm like, I'm not dealing with this shit, man.
Dude, that was like a 1900 moment, right?
Yeah, just about. It really was, no joke. And there was. I mean, our wardroom, we had a dozen chairs at the wardroom table, and then we had we called it the kitty table, unless we stuck all the JOs. There was 6 or 8 chairs over there for the JOs, and all that shit was just sliding back from one side and all the way to the side to get them.
Well, and the point that you're making also is when you're underway and you're in heavy seas, and you will be in, and none of the ships in the Coast Guard, none of them, the 378s, 210s, 270s, whatever the hell's in there right now, none of them are good in heavy seas. You know, they all ride rough.
They're made to go fast, instead of be stable.
And also, they're shallow. You know, they're meant to be. You know, they're not deep keeled boats. And even then, they're technically speaking, hell, man. You could be on a container ship. You know, the seas are rough. The ship is rough.
You barely feel it. Yeah. Well, you barely feel it on those big ones.
Yeah, you can. And even like cruise ships, I've been on cruise ships, and they'll avoid everything. They'll avoid all kinds of bad weather. But even those rock and roll a little bit. But life goes on. Like the cooks still have to cook. Melanie was asking the other day about eating, and she was asking about like frying things. I'm like, you don't fry shit. There's no deep fryers on a ship, babe. You know what I mean?
There was when I was in. Not anymore, I don't think. We would, I mean, so we made our menus. I don't know, we're getting ahead of ourselves, but we made our menus far in advance. But if it was a heavy seas day and we had something on the menu that we couldn't cook because of the weather, we just changed the menu. And oftentimes it was like you had to default to sandwiches, man, soup and sandwich.
Yeah.
That's all we can give you because we can't make anything else.
Oh yeah. Getting back to the Harriet Lane. Yeah. So there were definitely days when they were like, you're eating SpaghettiOs, because that's
all we can serve you without killing anybody. Yeah.
Yeah, that's some Edmund Fitzgerald shit, right? It's like
exactly.
It's too rough to feed you guys, but they did feed you. There was never a meal skipped.
Yeah, you don't skip meals. Yeah,
you can skip meals. But the other thing was it quarter rats?
Oh, mid rats.
Mid rats, yeah, mid rats. For those not knowing that, that's they served this meal at midnight, like right before the mid watch. The mid watch is midnight to 4 in the morning. And the reason they serve this meal is because, and correct me if I'm wrong, because if you have the mid watch, you don't get up for breakfast, so you still get 3 meals.
You sleep through breakfast. Yeah,
so that's kind of like your breakfast. But I was almost always like the most, like, it was delicious food, but usually it was like, pizza. It was like pizza pops or whatever, and
Hot
cheese,
Pockets or
Hot Pockets, cheese sticks. Yeah, it was bachelor food, big time.
Yep.
And
all the way, yeah. But there was plenty of people that got up for mid-ranch just for that.
Yes, because it was
the shit people wanted to eat. It wasn't really good for you, but
no, you could gain a lot of weight underway. You could.
Oh yeah, so lots of people did too.
Yeah, because you could actually eat. I mean, we would have cooks that would be like, yeah, man, I'm not freaking feeding 100 people on mid-rest. So a lot of times they would be like, I'm going to feed the people going to watch, and you guys can fight over what's left, right?
Yeah, exactly. Whatever's left over, yeah.
Yeah, whatever's left over. But almost always it was like maybe 10. And very rarely I wouldn't get up for mid-rest. I just want sleep is too valuable. But occasionally you'd be, coming off a watch or going on a watch. And
that's the other thing is that, we talked about those coffin racks and stuff. My coffin rack was filled with food, man, goodies and stuff.
Yeah.
And that was before the days of ramen noodles and all that. I mean, guys had cans of food, crackers, cigarettes. I mean, you get underway, 10, 12 cartons of cigarettes stuffed in your locker. You got to figure out someplace to stash it.
Well, smokes were cheaper underway. They didn't want taxed.
Mm-hmm. We still had guys. I mean, people are idiots, though. I mean, they brought tons of cigarettes with them. I'm like, that doesn't make sense. You can buy a carton of cigarettes for $5.
And that's not an exaggeration.
It's not. I worked the ship store. Yeah, I sold them
$5.
for a whole carton of cigarettes. Yep. And all you had to do was get out beyond 12 miles, and there's no tax because you're in international waters.
Yeah.
So the carton of cigarettes was usually like, whatever it was, $14. But it's like $100 now. Like, Johnny? It's like $100 for a carton of smoke now. Yeah.
So, the only reason people would pack like smokes or whatever is the ship sort and sell them. You could usually ask,
or it would run out. Yeah.
Yeah. You could, you could say, hey, like, for example, I dipped. I used to dip Kodiak and they didn't have Kodiak in the ship's store, but I could go to the SK and say like, hey, would you mind getting some rolls of Kodiak? And he would. But, you would do this weird math where you say, well, I dip about a can every other day. We're underway for 60 days. I'll need 30 cans. And you're like, Jesus, a ton. And you would just basically buy it and stack it in that skinny ass locker we were talking about, so. But yeah, and like you would get underway, and almost immediately they would open the ship store. But there's one phenomenon that I thought that, again, this is the way my civilian brain worked. And then when I was in the military, I witnessed something, and I was like, oh, this is not the way I expected life to go. Like when I was in 1989, 1990. They came out because people smoked. We were still in this world where people smoked, and also I thought it was interesting. There were things on that boat that were like Vietnam era, including some of the crew. Like some of the crew had fought in Vietnam, so that was weird to me, right? Like the SS-1 had been stationed in Vietnam. And at the time, I wish I would have talked to him about it, but I was too young and stupid to think about that being cool. But everybody smoked, and you were allowed to smoke in the ship, right? And the commandant came down.
You could smoke on the mess deck. I used to have guys smoking while they were eating, eating.
Yeah, and you'd have like
take a bite of food, take a drag off your cigarette.
Well, and there were like no smoking tables, but there were more smoking tables than non-smoking tables. And I remember they were like, okay, on October 20th. There is no more smoking inside the ship. Like that, whatever day it was, October 20th, 1990, no more smoking in the ship. And I remember thinking, that's not going to happen. I just know that this is not going to happen on this ship, right? Well, I can tell you right now, October 20th, 1990, they picked up every freaking ashtray. Nobody smoked inside the ship. Nobody bitched. It was just like, that's what we're going to do.
It just changed. Yep.
It blew my mind. I was just like, everybody's just following orders.
They conformed.
I mean, and these are not people that you would be like, oh, these are not robots. These people are definitely, they're like, and that's part of the military. I remember, again, jumping around here, like when I was stationed in San Antonio as an instructor, this was right after the Gulf War started. And there were PAs I worked with that were like, hey, I just got orders. Where to? I'm going to the Gulf where I'm going to, be on a forward unit, seeing combat. And I was just like, wow, you seem remarkably calm about that. You seem incredibly calm about the fact that you're going into combat, and they're like, eh. And that's kind of, now I'm not saying that, again, I'm making a comparison between not smoking inside the skin of the ship and going to combat.
Right, going to combat,
yeah. But I will tell you, there were definitely things we did where they were kind of like, hey, we're going to steer the ship into a hurricane. And you're kind of like, who am I to say,
Yeah, exactly.
What do you need me to do, So.
One thing I remember about that, because I was on the ventures for that, and one thing I remember is after we stopped smoking inside, we painted the inside of the mess deck. We painted, and we had a paint on Coast Guard ships that was called Interlux White, and it was white. It was bright ass white, And so when we started painting the ceiling, it was phenomenal to me how yellow the ceiling was from all the smoke, tar, and stuff. Because we just painted it the same color that it used to be, except, of course, 400,000 cigarettes burned in there. And sometimes it was heavy weather, and you would show movies on the mess deck. That's it, man. Mess deck is closed down tight, and half the people smoke, and it's just like, holy shit, man.
Yeah. I bet that what used to be Interlux White was a nice kind of a dark caramel color.
Yeah, it's exactly what it was.
Yeah.
But it kind of, it's funny because we were talking in the movie one we were doing about Raquel Welch. We were talking about those two generals that were drinking coffee out of that metal can and smoking. That's how it was. I mean, that's legitimately back in the day. That's how it was. I mean, that was a little bit of a cartoonish stereotype of it. But I mean, I look back now and was like, yeah. I mean, the only place that I know of for sure that you did not smoke was inside the galley. Mm-hmm. You couldn't smoke inside the galley. but you sure as hell stood in the door of the galley and smoked. All the smoke waft in there and stuff. But
when did you start smoking?
On the ventures, when I got $5 carton cigarettes. Well, because I figured out that shit, guess what, man? If you smoke, you get a smoke break. If you don't smoke, you don't get a smoke break. So, okay,
that's the thing. That was the thing.
Yeah, I'll start smoking.
You're like, it's a terrible habit. It's going to destroy my lungs, but damn, it's cheap.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Anyway, we've been talking over an hour now. Maybe we should stop there. So,
all right. Yeah. There's plenty more.
Yeah, I think next time I'm going to one of my friends, the guy who we've talked about before. He was actually on a black hole, and he was also a coxswain, and he's experienced things that we haven't experienced. I might invite him just to come in. And
yeah,
he's a good storyteller, so maybe because we're going to keep this going.
I love. There's just a couple of things. I mean, one last thing I'll say is that one of the things that I found very different about the Coast Guard than the other branches of the military, you had a crap ton of collateral duties, right? I was a cook, but I did so many other things because we don't have somebody for all those different jobs, right? Mm-hmm. In the Army, they have 800,000 people. We had 36,000 people in the entire Coast Guard, and we were rescuing people and doing SAR missions, doing environmental protection, doing boardings, do all that stuff, right? So you have to do a lot of different jobs. So that's where I enjoyed the Coast Guard the most, is all that collateral stuff. I was a boarding officer. I was a boarding team member, not a boarding officer. I was a boarding team member. I was a coxswain on several of the ships that on, and that was freaking fun. We did that blockade when Desert Storm kicked off. We did a blockade of LA Harbor. Mm-hmm. I was on an 82-footer, and we zoomed that little rubber boat all over that place, man, and it was so freaking fun. It was, yeah, and then same with the damage control.
By the way, a coxswain is a person who drives small boats.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. And damage control stuff, training the firefighters and all. I loved all that shit, man. Even being a cook was okay. It was fun. I enjoyed it, but also all that collateral stuff that I had the most fun doing.
Well, sometimes, again, people would ask me, like, what's the difference between, like, the Army and, which, by the way, everybody knows this in the Army. I respect the Army. So no dig, but, and this is somewhat hyperbolic, but people ask me what's the difference between, like, the Army and the Coast Guard. And the Army's got, like, one job, right? That's to, like, fight wars. Yeah. Right.
Defend the United States.
Defend the United States, right? And the Coast Guard's got, like you were just saying, ace navigation, law enforcement, search and rescue, which are the three big ones anyway, ice missions, and it goes down and down and down from there. And you could, very rarely, almost never, does somebody enter in the Coast Guard and say, oh, I am, and they always say, like, black hole being ace navigation, end up in a black hole fleet. And they end up doing black hole for 20, 30 years. You end up on a black hole ship, a boat buoy tender for a while. Next thing you know, you're over at a station, aid to navigate, or a small boat station. Then you're doing a white hole stuff, doing law enforcement, and you never know.
Yeah, you're just all over the place.
Yeah, all over the place. And even if somebody like me is a corpsman, if I'm a corpsman on a ace navigation ship, just like Doug is saying about him being a cook. He still has to drive the boats. He still has to do that shit, or do law enforcement. Yeah. Yeah. So I was also going to say, I know as far as 210s, I always really liked 210s, by the way. I thought they were cool looking boats. So.
Look cool, but gosh dang that. But the bottom of the ship was round, and God, they rocked and rolled like shit, man. I mean, I remember, no joke, I remember walking down the passageway in the middle of the ship, and we take a big roll. And so you're walking on the side of the wall. The ship is that far leaned over. And it would hang there for a second, and then go back the other way, and then you're walking down the other side of the wall.
Well, I also always like when it would pitch, and
I hated that.
Well, I liked when you'd be on a ladder, you know what I mean, and you would wait for it to drop, and you could
climb the ladder real fast.
You climb the ladder like Superman, you know what I mean. You actually would just like throw your arms, and you would be up to the next deck. Yeah. But love that shit. So yeah, it made sleeping rough. So
yes.
So. All right. Well, I tell you what, we will end it there.
Yeah, we'll pick this up again at some other point.
Sounds good. All right. Thank you very much, everybody, for listening, and you have a great day.
See ya.
This has been an Analog Spectrum production and presentation. We appreciate you listening to our podcast. It means a lot to both me and Doug. As always, we're looking for topic suggestions, folks to interview, and friends to join us on the show. If you can help with any or all of these, go ahead and send a quick note to Analog Spectrum, that's all one word, at gmail.com. Are you curious about our past uploads? Go check out our website. You'll find the link in the description. Finally, for any cast you've enjoyed, please leave a comment and a review. For that last part, it would mean a lot to us if you'd make it 5 stars. And don't forget to share us with your friends and family. Thanks again for taking time out of your busy day and spending time with us. There's nothing better than hanging out with you and all our friends in this crazy Analog Spectrum world.